Today we're filming at West Coast Dream Machines in their beautiful showroom. Come with me. Hey everyone, welcome back to The Sweet Take. Today we are joined by Emily Selleck, who is an Australian F1 journalist and work sits at the intersection of sport, culture, and style. I'm so excited to have her on today, and we are going to chat all things Australian Grand Prix, drivers as brands, of course, some pop culture headlines, and Emily's journey to F1. So, Emily, it's so great to meet you, and thanks for joining me on The Sweet Take.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of everything that you do, and I feel like we've got, lots to talk about.
Yes, so exciting that the season is starting. Is it next weekend? It's very, very close.
Yeah, it's crept up so quickly.
Why don't you introduce yourself and then we can jump right into all things Australian Grand Prix.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Emily. I'm originally from Australia, grew up around motorsport. I mean, Australia is a very big Formula One nation, and I've worked across all kinds of things in media, from entertainment to business, technology. But over the past 5-ish years, I've been really focusing on motorsport, and as you say, sort of the intersection with all aspects of culture, from, lifestyle and fashion to more businessy stuff. There's more happening, than ever in Formula One now. I think it's a really exciting time to be in the space.
Yes, and there's so many new fans that have, just started
Yes.
watching Formula One. So I'm really excited to talk to you about the Australian Grand Prix being the first one of the season. How would you describe it to someone who's never been?
Yeah, I think Melbourne is a very proud sporting city. I mean, it's the only city in the world that has both a Grand Prix and a Grand Slam, as they love to say. And I think the race really benefits from being like in the heart of the city, because there's no way you can be in Melbourne and not know the race is going on. I think the infrastructure around it, as kind of boring as that is, I think it like really adds to the success of the event. It's quite accessible. I think if you can go, like you do, and the tickets go like that, I think they've done a really, really good job.
And unlike some other races, the race is actually right in downtown Melbourne, right? You don't need to travel super far out to get to the track.
Yeah, that's right. It's at Albert Park, and they have free trams that run there. And I mean, of course, people are going to hear this and be like, I had to wait an hour for a tram. But I think generally speaking, like all the infrastructure around it is great. People are all in the city in the evenings wearing their merch. It's, a really, really lovely vibe.
Yeah. So on that note, is it like full on one everywhere right now leading up to it? Like, what is the energy like in Melbourne?
Yeah, I love coming home for the race, because it is, as you've described, I think there's sort of pop-up merch stores everywhere. I mean, even outside of like F1 time, you see people walking around Melbourne in like Alpine shirts. You don't see that in New York. And so it's a really fantastic vibe, particularly with Oscar doing so well. I mean, Australia loves an underdog, but I think we also love a winner. And right now people have really, really gotten behind him. I think it's a big difference between some other races. I mean, it's funny to go to Miami and you go to downtown Miami after a day at the track and people are like, what's Formula One? It's totally different here. Like everyone is around it.
Very cool. Would you say that there's anything unique about the Australian Grand Prix? For example, like if you went to Vegas, it's obviously like on the strip. It's very, there's lots of events around it in that sense. If you went to Austin, they've got crazy grounds, roller coasters. It's almost like going to a theme park. What's different about the Australian Grand Prix?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't spend too much time walking around the grounds when I'm there. I think we normally get stuck in the media center, but I think they do a good job of like representing Australian culture with the sort of restaurants and bars they have popping up at the track. And I think it's like a really natural sort of extension of the Melbourne experience. And I do think that there is sort of a real vibe in the city around, whether it's like restaurants and bars or, nightlife. People who come to Melbourne, I think, get a really good taste of Australian culture and sort of Australian hospitality. It's, just a really, really well-run event. I think if you get a chance to come, it's definitely worth it.
Cool. Well, one event that I've seen over the years, which I sort of don't understand, so I'm hoping that you can explain it, is this really cool event called Glamour on the Grid. I've seen celebrities on there. Everyone's very dressed up. It looks like the Met Gala a little bit. Can you explain what this Glamour on the Grid event is?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a real staple on the Australian social calendar. I would say sort of anyone who is anyone within like the niche Australian celebrity and influencer landscape wants to be there. And gosh, I wish I knew how many years it's been going on for now, but I think it was a really, really smart call on the AusGP organization's part because it was around the time that we were seeing F1 sort of permeate wider culture. They've created this event that, is not really about Formula One, but by virtue of being at the track, it's made, the conversation about every, influencer and celebrity around Australia about Formula One. And it's made it this event that everybody wants to be at. Everybody is like marking their calendar.
I didn't even know that it wasn't F1 related. So it is like a fashion event that they just host at the Australian Grand Prix. Is that how the best way to think about it?
Yeah, that's right. So it's like a black tie affair. Everyone arrives on like the main straight. You kind of walk down the pit lane and then go into sort of like the paddock club area is where it's hosted. And you have all of the main event sponsors have sort of pop-ups there and like nibbles and drinks. And yeah, like a lovely social affair, but definitely like a great way for the AusGP to be advertising, their event to a wide demographic.
Yeah, the photos look amazing and it's at night. So like everything just looks very like glam. So you kind of touched on it a little bit. Obviously, Oscar is doing so great. Australia wants a winner. Tell me about what Oscar Piastri fandom is like in Australia. Is it like as big as Daniel? Is it different?
Yeah, gosh, he couldn't be bigger. I mean, particularly right now around the race, every billboard, every tram, it's Oscar's face everywhere. It is funny because I think when Daniel was still racing, there was a little bit of a transition period, and they are such different personalities. I think Daniel really represents that typical Aussie larrikin, and as we know, Oscar's a very different kind of person, but I think Australia has so like wholeheartedly embraced him. It's everywhere. It's Oscar Piastri country.
And he's from Melbourne, isn't he? I think because Daniel's from West Coast, from Perth, but I think Oscar is from Melbourne.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody has a story about, my sister's friend went to school with him. My mom's hairdresser knows his mom. Like it's funny. It's obviously a big city, but kind of a small town in that way.
That's so funny. Everyone's like 2 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Let's transition a little bit into like the racing and this year's F1 season. Last year, I remember the Australian Grand Prix was crazy. The weather, it was pouring rain. It was so dramatic. All the rookies had never driven an F1 car in the rain before. Oscar had that super sad heartbreak when he spun near the end. But does it look like it's going to rain next weekend, or it's hot and sunny and unlikely?
So at this stage, it's looking all right. But the thing with Melbourne is that it is so changeable. It can be sunny in the morning, pouring in the afternoon. I think that obviously adds to the jeopardy of it all. I think last year was, a real spanner in the works and a real test for the rookies, as you say. But I think no matter what, there are so many uncertainties going into this race with the new regulations, obviously new teams joining, more rookies. So I think no matter what the weather looks like, it could be a bit of chaos.
Well, I can't wait. And like the whole world is like about to watch. Plus, Drive to Survive comes out just before. So there's going to be all this extra hype.
Yes.
What do you think about the new teams that have joined the grid this year?
Yeah, I mean, so we have obviously Audi taking over the Sauber name. I think it's exciting to have such a great brand on the grid. I think Jonathan Wheatley is doing some really good work over at that team. And I hope they, have a bit more success. And obviously Cadillac, there's so much talk around the American team. I think it's really exciting. I just hope people are able to give them a bit of grace, given the fact that, starting from scratch isn't easy. We might see them take a year, 2 years to really, get a hold of everything. I think it's incredibly exciting also to have Ford coming back to the grid with Red Bull. I think the GM Ford rivalry is a really good thing for F1 in America. I mean, rivalry breeds interest. There's a reason why one of the biggest racing movies of all time is Ford versus Ferrari. People love that. So I think it's, a really, really exciting time for the sport.
Like you said, new regulations, new teams, new rules, new cars. Like no one can really predict what's going to happen next weekend.
No, I mean, it's one of the biggest regulations shake up in the sport's history. And then we've obviously heard, differing perspectives. Max sort of made some comments about what it's like with, like the electrification aspect of the new era of cars. I think no matter what we hear from the drivers, it's going to be a really exciting season because there's so much change and we still don't know, who's really got this regulation cycle right.
Definitely. I am like secretly, you can see a bunch of Ferrari logos in the back here. I'm secretly rooting for Ferrari, and it sounds like they might have figured it out. And I like all the teams, but I'm also rooting for Lewis and Ferrari and everyone to do well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Like, we all want Lewis to do well. And last season, it was just really such a shame. You know, there wasn't a lot of positives to take from it. But I think it'd be fantastic to see him come back and do well and be able to, go out on a high. I think, yeah, everyone feels that way.
Yeah. So, Emily, why don't we transition a little bit to your story? Because one of the most asked questions I get at Milkshake is how to start a career in motorsport, how to meet people in the community. So, I'd love to learn what your path was to be able to cover the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I have covered a lot of different things throughout my career before I transitioned into Formula One predominantly. And I think that was sort of because I knew I didn't want to go down a traditional sports reporter path because I had so many other interests and like loved how different parts of culture intersect. So, I was covering pop culture predominantly when I approached the sports desk where I was working and asked if we could start doing Formula One. And they were really fantastic about it, but it was definitely on me to sort of spearhead that and make the connections and, build the contacts. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is, just to kind of you have to bootstrap and you have to figure it out because nobody is going to give you opportunities. You really have to go and look for them yourself. And so got really, I think, lucky in that way to have sort of a way into the paddock. But from there, I didn't know a single person in F1 and really just had to work to get to know people and build relationships. And everyone in the paddock has been so fantastic and so welcoming and has given me really great advice over the past 5 years. But everybody has such a different path into Formula One, whether it's starting other motorsport series or, working across other areas before moving into motorsport. There's no one traditional path.
Yeah, that is I guess, a theme I keep hearing from people I've asked this question. Like, you need to take the initiative because no one can read your mind about what you
Yeah.
want to do. And so, did you know from when you first started your journalism career that motorsport coverage was where you wanted to end up?
It's funny because I'm home at the moment with my parents, and my dad is like a massive motorsport fan. And we always say when I was a kid, like I never could have imagined being here because it was always on at home. I was, aware of it, and like I always liked sport, but I was also really into pop culture and entertainment and business stories. And I just don't think I could have imagined Formula One becoming what it is now in terms of like the way it's permeated the zeitgeist. Like that was really my reason for transitioning into motorsport, because I realized there is finally a wider audience for this beyond just people who want to read about strategy and, the tires. I think, as you know, what you do is reaching a whole different demographic, and it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, no, it is funny how I guess it just evolved into a place that lifestyle and culture really made sense to talk about it, and actually is an entry point of a lot of people coming to F1 and discovering the sport to
Yeah.
begin with.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to talk about some of your most amazing moments that you've had, in F1. Can you tell me what are some of, like, I don't know, the biggest pinch me moment you had?
Ooh, I mean, the biggest pinch me moment definitely has to be my very first day in the paddock. It was actually in Australia, and it was right after Abu Dhabi 21. And I had an interview with Max, like immediately sat down with him, briefly met Daniel, who was sort of the one driver for me who I was like a very big fan of before I worked in the space. Went to the press conferences, and it was still sort of COVID era, so there weren't too many journalists there. And it was so much. I mean, Formula One is such a unique space. There are so many nuances to the paddock. It takes a long time to really understand how everything operates. And so it was really just such an overwhelming experience, but incredibly exciting as someone who's been a fan of the sport for a long time.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like, oh my gosh, this is in real life right now, and everything that I'm
Yeah.
seeing is just like now in front of you. Has there been a favorite interview that you've done over the years that still sticks with you?
Oh, I think it has to be the first time I interviewed Daniel because, as I said, he's the driver who was Australia's hero and really grew up watching him. But I remember it was in Canada, and it was such a chaotic day. I had been really bothering Harry, his PR at the time, to interview him, and I was coming from a Red Bull event away from the track, and I didn't understand really how the paddock operated logistically yet. And so I got an Uber to the track. Of course, they couldn't drop me near the paddock. I am running across across the track, it is raining. My pants are too long. They're soaked like up to my knees. And I like arrive in the paddock just in time. And I'm sure I was probably like, oh my God, I am a mess. But it was amazing to talk to him. I think he is such a fantastic person, great driver on track, had an amazing career. I think he's, got a great career ahead of him and is, a really lovely person.
Oh my gosh, I can totally relate about the logistics. Getting to and from the paddock is so stressful. I think that's the most stressful part of your day, trying to like figure out how to get from point A to point B. And like, you can't enter here. The exits are changing per day. It's like so stressful.
Absolutely. And especially if you're coming, with a brand who's organizing your pass, it's like, where do you meet them? I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing about F1. It's just so many, logistics.
Totally. So, why don't we talk a bit about the F1 ecosystem and drivers, WAGs, personal brands, kind of the shift we're seeing in the sport? Who do you think understands personal branding the best in F1?
Yeah, I mean, look, the obvious answer is Lewis, right? I mean, he is the blueprint and, spent his years doing what Mercedes wanted and working with their brands to be at a place to be able to, do everything on his own for the most part. I think there are quite a few drivers doing things differently, but that like makes sense for them. If I had to give one answer, I'd probably say Charles. I think he's really advantaged from like being from Monaco and the sort of mythology attached to him. But I think he has made some good decisions to sort of play into that well. And I think if he, left Formula One tomorrow, he could have a great career.
Totally. He, while has like such a loyal following and is so big now, he also still comes across as super down to earth. And I think him and now with his fiance, Alex, together, they built this like really powerful brand together.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I have friends who know nothing about Formula One, but know Alexandra. And I think, there's something to that. You really can't be putting that down because that's powerful.
Definitely. I just can't wait to see what their wedding is going to be like. I'm just like, I love weddings in general and just been speculating about what the vibe's going to be. Where is it going to be at? What's she going to wear? And like, it's going to be one of those celebrity weddings.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so curious what the guest list will look like. And as you say, the visuals, I think, she's got a beautiful eye. So I'm very, very excited to see the content from the wedding whenever it happens.
So what's your perspective on whether drivers or teams have a stronger brand?
Well, I think the teams have never had more power than they do now, particularly when drivers are starting out. I mean, I remember talking to Lando quite a few years back where he was saying, well, I'm not Lewis. I can't just go start my own fashion line or do my own deals. You kind of have to earn your stripes, so to say, within a team before you can kind of work that into your contract. I do think, as you say, like the power balance is shifting a little bit, and certainly drivers are able to build up massive fan bases even before they join the grid through F2 and coming through the ranks. But I do think the teams definitely have a lot more brand equity, particularly a team like a Ferrari or a Mercedes that has so much history and has some real power.
Yeah, I find it so crazy. Like I've been watching F1 since like the Michael Schumacher days, and I don't remember any of those drivers starting clothing lines, drink companies, I don't know, whatever that they're
No.
up to nowadays. And so it's really interesting, like the power of an F1 athlete and just like the people in their ecosystem nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also a knowledge that to have a long career beyond your time as an athlete, you sort of have to be doing those things, which is obviously a really smart move, You want to be able to have something to do if you lose your seat, next year.
Yeah, exactly. So, on the topic of branding, we are seeing some, interesting brands in F1 right now in categories that we maybe didn't expect before. Is there a brand or a few brands that you find really inspiring that are in F1 that are doing interesting things?
Okay, I'm glad you asked this because I have an answer I think might surprise you, but it came to me last night. So, when Formula One sent out the press release about signing a chocolate bar partner, I will put my hands up and say I was one of the people who was like, there's no way KitKat is going to do anything interesting with this. Surely they have just signed this deal for a bit of, exposure. We're going to see KitKats being sold at races. And I am in like a relatively small beach town right now, and I went to the grocery store last night, and what KitKat is doing within these spaces, like really owning the CPG space, is phenomenal. I mean, they had like a cardboard F1 car and a whole sort of like physical activation. But then if you look at the product itself, I'm not sure if you've seen, they've like changed the nutritional information on the back. So it's like per car. They've really put,
What?
yeah, a lot of detail into it. And I've been seeing people like back in New York, people who aren't really into F1 are like, I have to try and find the KitKat F1 car. And they've been able to make it this desirable product, which is, I think, a real sign of a partnership that's actually like having impact and landing and people are wanting to interact with. And obviously the CPG space is massive, but we haven't seen that many people really jump in and do something interesting. So I think credit to KitKat because it's actually quite cool.
No, I was not expecting you to say that. And I need to go find this KitKat now because that almost is like the Rode phone case. It's like a viral moment where it's like, I got to go find this limited time product and see what it says on the back. That's really cool. And I wouldn't expect that from a chocolate bar company.
No, because the thing is, they have such a big budget. They don't need to do something interesting. They can just sign a partnership and have branding around the track. We do see lots of partners kind of just allow that to be the thing. But I think it's always really cool when brands take it that extra step because it's a real win-win for everyone. It's exciting for us as, fans and consumers and better for them if more people are genuinely engaged.
Well, two announcements. I guess one that has been around for a while, but one that's more recent for the American market is that we can now watch a couple races in IMAX. And obviously, Apple will be taking over the rights as of this year to broadcast in the US. What are your thoughts on these two new partners in F1?
Yeah, the IMAX thing is interesting. I just saw that announcement that they'll be showing some races in the theater. I think I'm curious if they saw the data around US fans who have expressed a lot of interest in wanting to be involved in community gatherings around Formula One, because I think that would make a lot of sense. That's kind of the best way for them to create like a gathering place to engage with Apple and IMAX. But I do think it is quite a high barrier to entry activity. I think we're going to see many people who aren't already Formula One fans buying a ticket and going to the cinema, but I'm glad they're trying something new. I think there's definitely an opportunity for Apple to do something cool. I'd love to see some more original programming down the line. It's definitely a massive, massive platform. I'm just curious to see what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, one thing I hope that Apple does is in the F1 movie, I thought some of the camera angles of the racing was amazing. Like the one looking back at the driver where you could see their facial expressions. There was one that was like bird's eye view. And I don't know if they made it like, if you want to see these camera angles, you got to see an IMAX on the big screen. Like that would be something I would actually pay to go and see.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I think having, a real selling point or like a specific thing, as you say, like come here and we'll give you this exclusive angle is amazing. I went to F1 HQ last year actually and was talking to the team around the cameras they developed like with Apple and the production team. And they were talking about like the really, really extensive process of approvals for putting new cameras on the car, particularly around weight, because obviously teams are accounting for every single gram on the car. And sometimes they'll want to trial something and teams are like, we need to figure out a different way. It was really, really interesting.
Yes, you're right. Now that I'm thinking about the logistics of making that happen, the teams are probably not going to agree because it's probably also not aerodynamic to have this thing on the hood of the car looking back at you that's like blocking air and messing up the car. So yeah, I guess that might not happen.
But there are some creative minds, in Formula One. They'll be able to figure out a way.
Yes, definitely. So, we started off this conversation with you talking about how much you love pop culture and entertainment. So we have to cover some of those topics, Emily. And obviously the biggest one that a lot of people are talking about are Lewis and Kim. So what are your thoughts on this growing relationship?
Yeah, I made a video about this a couple of weeks ago because, as you say, I've written many stories about Lewis, many stories about Kim. So weirdly, I'm a bit of a subject matter expert on these two people. The fact of the matter is we don't know like the nature of the relationship, but something I think people might not realize is that when we talk about like a PR relationship, often it's not a fake relationship. Usually it's like a real romance where the people in it and their teams have said, you know what, like it's actually quite advantageous if we go for dinner at the corner store or Sushi Park where we know there are going to be cameras because this is beneficial for both of us. So I think that's worth keeping in mind for people who are like, this is a fake relationship. relationship. That's not really a thing that we see too often, but it's a interesting pop culture story. I think it's always good to see F1 crossing over with different parts of culture.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I don't personally know Lewis or Kim, but they kind of strike me as the people, if they don't want to do something, they're just not going to do it. And so I'm sure they are definitely friends. They co hosted the Met Gala together. And I personally would love to see Lewis with somebody and someone just makes him happy, whoever that is, because I think everyone deserves that. So I'm excited to see how it evolves. Do you think that if Kim started coming to races, that she would have an effect on F1, similar to how Taylor Swift had an effect on the NFL when she started coming?
I think Taylor was in quite a unique position because she was coming off this massive success of the Eras tour. It was this like monocultural moment. She was so beloved. Her Q score kind of couldn't have been higher. And I think the Travis relationship is something people were so invested in and really excited about. I do think Kim is not really at the peak of her cultural relevance right now. And from what I've heard, even in like the pop culture sphere, people who know nothing about Formula One, I don't think this relationship kind of has the same allure that the Travis and Taylor relationship had. So I would be very curious what sort of effect, if any, there would be if Kim starts showing up in the paddock.
Well, I think there'd just be a lot of camera attention, definitely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's not the first time that we've seen a Kardashian in the paddock or at F1. I saw Kendall there many times. Celebrities aren't new to F1.
No, definitely not.
Not at all. So, Emily, why don't we close with a milkshake tradition called Checkered Confessions? It literally is a quick fire, and I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, and I just want the first thing that pops in your head, and there's no wrong answers. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Favorite Aussie, Oscar, or Daniel?
Daniel, because there's nostalgia there, but we love Oscar.
Yes. Melbourne or Monaco?
See, Monaco is so special, but I have to stay strong and say Melbourne.
Ooh, I love that. The driver who gives the best interviews.
Ooh, I'll give you like a left of field answer. Esteban Ocon is always quite a good interview.
Really? And why would you say that?
He's really relaxed. Like you could kind of ask him anything and I think he would answer it. Like he's not too bothered by things. I think he's a nice guy. I've always had a good experience talking to him.
Yeah. Nice. Which Grand Prix do you think is the most underrated?
Okay, so everybody in the paddock says that Hungary is their favorite race. I've not been, but I don't hear many people talk about Hungary as a favorite. So I'd say that's probably a bit underrated based on what I've heard.
That's a great answer. It's actually also one I want to go to because I've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
And they just did a huge renovation there too. So it'd be cool to check out.
I do think part of it is that it's normally the race going into the summer break. So I think people are often, that's part of it.
Yeah, they're in a good mood.
Yeah.
Okay, last ones. Finish this sentence. We will look back on F1 in 2026 and say,
we have a first-time world champion. I don't know who,
ooh.
but I think this could be a year for a new champion.
Well, I'm going to have to replay this after Abu Dhabi at the end of the year. And hopefully that comes true because I also agree because there are so many variables right now that any team could be in the lead.
Yeah, we have no idea. It was great to see cars on track last week in Bahrain, but, that didn't really give us any idea of which teams have, got these new regulations right. So it could definitely go one of many ways.
Well, I am going to be staying up late to watch quali and the race next week, and I can't wait. Thank you so much for joining me, Emily. It was so great to chat with you, learn more about the Australian race, also how you got into F1. And, chat about some topics that I'm personally very invested in. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.